Final hour for us on this Tuesday. Thanks for popping in, staying a while, sticking around if you've been doing so for the first 2 hours with Lucas and myself. 615-737-1045 is how you can jump in on the show. Eric Kane of VolQuest going to be here in just a few minutes from now. Talk about the latest with the University of Tennessee. Did you have any legal updates? Did you have to call the lawyer while I was gone for reasons lawsuit related, TRO related, or otherwise?
All is quiet on the Tennessee/Virginia versus the NCAA front as we await a ruling from the preliminary injunction hearing. Could be today, could be in 2 weeks.
Who's to say? Head on a swivel. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch is where you can interact in the F&M Bank chat. Have your comments read there. Questions, comments, and concerns expressed. Speaking of questions, comments, and concerns, some of you have been sending us, whether that's tweets or messages or comments in the chat, basically since the season ended, about DeAndre Hopkins and about his level of, I don't want to say his level of commitment to the Titans, but how realistic it was that DeAndre Hopkins was going to be on your roster beyond 2023. And I've always thought that conversation was interesting. I got tagged in a couple of discussions yesterday, and I saw PK wrote about the future of DeAndre Hopkins and why it's really not as complicated as some people want to make it. DeAndre Hopkins signed a 2-year, $26 million deal with the Titans last offseason. The way that it was structured was very much backloaded so that they could make the cap hit work with DeAndre Hopkins, who counted against the cap for just over $4 million last year, 4.02 and change. They did have a potential out at the end of the season if they chose to move on from DeAndre Hopkins for whatever reason. And to date, Lucas, I don't think there's any reason to move on from DeAndre Hopkins. There is certainly no reason to cut the best wide receiver that you have. He's the only wide receiver that you can count on currently in your wide receiver room because NWY, as a pending free agent, is going to be the second most reliable wide receiver in your roster, and Chris Moore is also not on your roster, which leaves you Traylon Burks and Kyle Phillips, who none of you trust. Nor should you. There's no reason to yet. So unless the Titans cut DeAndre Hopkins, he's playing here next year, there's not a situation. I mean, could he try and make things messy and leverage a trade? I mean, I guess so, but there's no indication of that. I know there were moments throughout the course of the season where some of you guys would be critical or not, maybe not critical, but respond to post-game videos of him, right? After they'd lose, because inevitably they'd lose. They'd lost more times than they won last year, 6-11. And DeAndre Hopkins has a tone that does not necessarily connote excitement. Is that fair? He's not an overly animated type of human being, at least in a locker room setting when we're asking him post-game questions, especially after they have started to compile these losses. He speaks, he gets through his media session, and a lot of you try to assign more meaning to that than I think is actually there.
He was cutting his hair.
Oh, that's right. That was a discussion, wasn't it? That he's just clearly over it because he's getting a haircut on his Friday press conference, when in fact he's honestly doing us a favor by doing it while he's getting his haircut, because at least he's in one spot for all of us to gravitate around.
He is one of the more measured individuals.
Measured.
At that position.
Oh, for sure at that position.
That you can think of, yeah.
For sure at that position.
He's got that same stoic expression when he makes a big play, when he's talking to an official, when Will Levis is getting heated at him on the sideline, when he's talking to the media. It's the same D-Hop.
There have people that have been, for example, Des Bryant was on Twitter at some point in the last couple of months talking about DeAndre Hopkins needs to play somewhere else. DeAndre Hopkins responded to that, basically saying, I'm playing where I wanted to play. Now, we understand that the circumstances around DeAndre Hopkins coming here were financially based first, that he has a relationship with Derrick Henry, who right now is trending towards not being a member of this roster.
That he had a relationship with Mike Vrabel as well.
He had a relationship with Mike Vrabel and Tim Kelly. All of these things counted for why DeAndre Hopkins ultimately landed here and not, for example, the Kansas City Chiefs that could have very, very much used that man and, won the Super Bowl anyway. Maybe they don't need him.
They don't.
That's so dumb.
They don't. It's not maybe they don't. They obviously don't.
It's so dumb.
It would be scary, but they don't.
Yeah. So with Hopkins, it's much ado about nothing. And the only reason I bring it up is because I have seen a fair amount of what's the proper word? Scuttlebutt, misinformation about people trying to discuss it within terms of Hopkins having leverage to kind of push his way out if he wanted to be out. Trying to make more of DeAndre Hopkins' situation than DeAndre Hopkins is making of it, right? DeAndre Hopkins has talked about Nashville being a vibe. That's not just something that he said. I think that he means it here, and I think that he enjoys the city and a part of seeing this city get to a place where it hasn't been the last couple of years. It's a good place. It's a reason that a lot of athletes end their careers here. Not just within the context of coming to the Titans at the end to get a payday, but Nashville as a city to spend time here after whatever your football career is.
He's recruiting T. Higgins on social media.
He is. He's leaving the swords crossed emoji, right? In the comment section on the gram. See, now who's doing meme social media radio?
Well, when it's relevant. but really, though, when you brought this up to me, I almost thought it wasn't even worth addressing because in my mind, there's absolutely nothing that you can look at as a reason for concern.
But you've seen some of the stuff that I'm talking about that is getting traction that it shouldn't get. You know what I mean? So that...
what situation is there where D-Hop is not playing for this team? Either they cut him, which would make zero sense, or he demands a trade.
Well... Or they, and this is the least likely, but if we're presenting all options on the table, is DeAndre Hopkins a trade asset? In any way, shape, or form as you try to accumulate more bites at the apple in the draft, I would argue against something like that. I don't think anything like that is any kind of realistic, but if you're going to present to me options, could it happen? Sure, I guess.
Cardinals could have traded D-Hop if there were offers. Could they
could
not?
Have.
Why would the market for DeAndre Hopkins be that much better now than it was a year ago?
Oh, he's much cheaper. He's much cheaper. It's a much bigger cap hit than he had last year. It's $17 million against 4 or 17. I think it's $17.9. It's almost $18 million. That counts against the cap. So it's definitely if you were going to trade for him, it wouldn't make sense now, but it was a much bigger thing that you would have to eat if you assumed his Cardinals contract. Even as Arizona just took on the dead money to move him.
You're right. I'm just talking about market interest in general. Obviously, the market for DeAndre Hopkins probably wasn't quite where he thought it would be or wanted it to be, right?
For sure.
I don't know that he thought he'd be ending up somewhere making $13 million average annual salary on a 2-year deal.
I think he's a very realistic person, just financially. When you say measured, I think that applies to a variety of different elements to his life, unless you accuse him of being, past his prime on social media, and then he's going to bite your head off because he does have a tendency to do that. But Hopkins, I think in today's wide receiver market, $13 million for a Hall of Fame caliber player, even if he's not the best version of himself, DeAndre Hopkins was absolutely worth 13, 15, $17 million based on the performance last year for a terrible football team that couldn't get any blocking and changed quarterbacks at least twice, if not 3 times, if you're going to count Malik getting in there for a handful of snaps in Baltimore. Or, well, not in Baltimore, but against Baltimore.
He's the best player on your offense.
He sure as hell now with Derek set to expire.
No, he is. There's no one else that you can put in there.
That. Skoronski's not better at his job. Spears not yet better at his job. And, Tajay Spears would love to be the DeAndre Hopkins of running backs. So at 32, and he will be 32 in this season, he is going to be playing for the Tennessee Titans unless some unforeseen circumstance happens. So the only reason that we take time to address it is because there's a bunch of misinformation out there, as there is, all over the news cycle in a variety of different elements. I hate that we have to address things just because there's misinformation, but just to clear things up, he's under contract here next year. There is almost no indication of this player being anywhere but here in 2024. All right, coming up next, Eric Kane of VolQuest. We'll get the latest on the University of Tennessee. Baseball has started as well. Basketball in full swing. Eric Kane will join us next.